Hi, this is Professor Blanck, and today we're going to talk about plagiarism. This is a really important topic. This could get you failing a class that you don't want to fail, and sometimes a little bit by accident. So I want to make sure that we teach you how to write with integrity, teach you how to identify plagiarism, and give you some tips on avoiding it so that you don't get into this problem. So first, I want to tell you about the challenge of academic writing. We ask you to do two contradictory things. We ask you to write something that is original, that's original research, but we also ask you to base it on other people's work, primary and secondary sources. And so this puts you in a situation where you want to look original, like you're having original ideas, but we also want to have these primary and secondary sources, and you're trying to balance that. And so this does cause some problems, but understanding what plagiarism is should clarify that. And as a young scholar, as a freshman, sophomore, junior at college, don't worry as much about the originality as making sure you don't make a mistake and not give credit for the work that somebody else has done. So plagiarism comes on a continuum. There is deliberate plagiarism that's really very obvious, the kind of stuff that could get you thrown out of the university, and there's stuff that could possibly be construed as accidental plagiarism. On the bad side, on the deliberate plagiarism side, we have people who have bought or stole a paper. We have people who copy papers from other people, or copying and pasting stuff and taking sources directly off the internet or other books and putting it directly into their paper. None of those things are acceptable. But there's sometimes that you might accidentally do things if you're sloppy and not really paying attention to the work that you're engaged in. One thing that a lot of students have a hard time with is understand if you're building on somebody else's idea, if you read a book and they had an idea about the past and you want to use that idea, you must cite it. You must give them credit for coming up with that idea in your paper. And as a professor, I like to see that you've recognized a good idea in another scholar and are willing to use it. It's like showing your work in mathematics. Another thing that sometimes is an accidental way that people plagiarize is that they don't paraphrase well. And I'm going to give you some advice on how to plagiarize in a minute, or excuse me, not on how to plagiarize, but how to paraphrase. How to paraphrase well in a moment, but you need to make sure that your writing is completely your writing and not the writing of another. And when you do that paraphrasing, make sure you cite it. And then lastly, you might, in a sloppy moment, copy and paste something into your source and forget to put the quotation marks in around it, might forget to put the citation around it, and in your mind it's a complete accident. It wasn't something you deliberately meant to do, but this happens a lot, and it's just a product of students being sloppy. So please watch out for these kinds of things. All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit about when documentation is necessary and when it's not necessary. When do you have to cite and when do you not have to cite? First, let's talk about the things you must cite. You must cite anytime you use a direct quote from anybody else. So if you have exact words from another source, that must be cited. If you interview someone, you must cite that. Give a time and place. There's citation formats that are available for you. If you are reprinting a diagram or an image, that must be cited. If you are talking to your friend and they give you a great idea about how to see your paper in a new way, cite it. Give your friend credit for helping you with your paper. Now, you don't need to cite when you're talking about your own experiences. So if you went to the library, you went to a historical site, and you want to talk about what you saw, those things don't need to be cited, but you'll want to make it clear that that was your experience. If you're using common knowledge, and common knowledge is like generally understood ideas, like the fact that somebody matures as they get older, and that means that their behavior changes. And so if you're attributing some kind of change in George Washington's behavior to his maturity, everybody understands that when somebody gets older that their behavior changes. That does not need to be cited. However, and likewise, the fact that George Washington is the first president, these general accepted facts, anything your grandmother would know, you don't need to cite those. But if you have a question about whether it's a generally accepted fact or not, cite it. It's better to oversight than to undercite. You know, one might lead to a little note nobody will take any points off of. The other one could lead to failure of the class. So always cite if you're in question on that. And lastly, if you happen to do an experiment, which shouldn't be the case in most history topics, you don't have to cite that information because that's your experience, your experiment. Let me talk a little bit about quotations for a moment. So here I have a text, and you can see that there's a quotation embedded in the text. It's a paragraph, and it's talking about Cotton Mather and his conversion of slaves. And there's a place where I have a quotation of 3 or 4 words that I used in this source. And you note at the end of that, there's a citation, a footnote marker, right? And around the words that came directly from the source, I have a quotation marks. Now that entire sentence comes from the same source. So even if I didn't have those quotations, I would need to have a citation. But the parts that are the specific words from the source, those must be in quotation marks. And you can see that the footnote is right there next to there to see that that's been cited properly. But you also need to cite even when you're paraphrasing. Even if you don't put any direct quotes in there, there must be a citation. The next thing I want to talk about is how to properly paraphrase. Paraphrasing is difficult. It's more of an art than a science. But I have a process through which you can go so that it's a little bit of a safeguard against having an accidental bad paraphrase. First of all, you want to read the text really, really carefully where you want to use the stuff that you want to use in your paper. Then after you do that, make sure that you close the book, put it far away from yourself so you're not tempted to open it, and then go to writing your text. Write the sentence before, write the sentence after. Make sure it's all in your words and what you want to say, not what the text says, but what fits your paper and what your argument is. And then go get the book, open it back up. Oh, make sure you put a citation in there. Make sure you then go back to the book and compare what you wrote to what's in the text. Make sure first that it's accurate, that you're not misrepresenting it. Secondly, make sure that you're not using any words from the text directly. If you are, you'll want to put those in quotation marks. And then thirdly, if it's written in the same sentence structure, you'll need to switch it around. You can't just put synonyms in for the words that are there. And if you do that, you should be pretty safe. It takes a little time to make sure you paraphrase well, but your paper will be so much better. Lots and lots of quotes don't make a strong writer. Writing in your voice and letting your voice shine through the paper will make your paper a stronger paper. So really don't be afraid to paraphrase, but just do it really carefully. Let me offer some do's and don'ts when you're trying to avoid plagiarizing. Do use quotation marks when you use the original words of another person. You'll note some of these are a little bit redundant, but I want them in your head. Do provide page numbers whenever possible. Page numbers are a key part of your citation. Do cite when you look at a source, even if you don't quote it. This is the paraphrasing idea. Do paraphrase other people's works, but always do it properly and always cite. So always cite when you paraphrase. Do use proper citation techniques. Make sure you go to a style guide like the one we have in this class when you're putting your citations in so they're done properly. Never worry, and this should be a don't worry about oversighting. We won't mark you wrong for putting too many citations in. Too few citations could get you in trouble. Don't ever, not even for a small assignment that has a small part of your grade, cut and paste material off of the internet. This just causes troubles for you. Sometimes it's so apparent that they don't even change the font. And all of a sudden you might have some text that's a completely different font. Type it in yourself. This will encourage you to paraphrase. This will encourage you to think about what parts are yours and which parts come from the source. And this is something that a lot of students aren't aware, but don't use a paper from another class. That is considered cheating at Rowan University. And so if you feel like you want to draw from a previous paper, you can talk to a professor about using your paper from a previous class and how you want to deepen it, but nobody's going to find it acceptable to turn in a paper from another class. Each class has its own individual perspective. Lastly, and most importantly, don't plagiarize. It's stealing. It makes my semester terrible, and it will undoubtedly make your semester terrible. So always feel free to ask your instructor if you have any questions. If you're unclear about whether something is cited properly, if you're unclear if you need to cite, just drop an email. That's far better than finding out after the fact. Thank you.